Okay, the most basic element of what we need to do is just add an exterior light, because I have interior lights in here. If we turn off the layers, we can see them. I like to turn off the roof and the structure so that we're just looking directly into the house. Okay, so you can see like a chandelier here with little mesh lights for the light bulb. And I should just show this real quick, but this is a sphere light so that there's light emanating from the chandelier. This isn't super accurate to what's really happening. I mean, what you'd really have is little sphere lights at each one of these light bulbs, maybe. Maybe I should have done that. But what I have is just a sphere light here that is excluding this whole chandelier. Okay, so light is emanating out from the chandelier area, which will give you the basic effect that that chandelier would do. It would be better, like I said, if there was a little sphere light around each of these light bulbs, and then you could just make them instances of each other, and each one would exclude the same thing, which would be this group, which is called shandy, short for chandelier, and bulbs. Okay, so if you look at this light, it's an exclusion of shandy and bulbs 1. Okay, that's this other one over here. Okay, so it's not going to be affecting that light. It's just going to be emanating out from that light, basically. Okay, so there is lights already in here. There's these little spotlights pointing in different directions, which are just little puck V-Ray lights to highlight like the art, to highlight this plant, that kind of thing. Okay, lighting plays an important role. We have to think of this interior scene as if it's photography, right? We are the photographer in this virtual scene. So lighting is very important to good photography, obviously. Okay, but there's some basic lights in there. We can adjust them if it will make our shot better. But let's first go into Cosmos. Sorry, I did that a little bit fast. Go into Cosmos, the button up here, and do HDRIs. And we'll go to, what should we start with? An evening. Let's grab this one. This one looks nice. Actually, I want a little more direct light. Maybe not. It's okay. We'll do this. Okay, so Sunset 012, and you saw I just downloaded it. Now you hit this to import it. Asset import in progress. You can close this down. And if you look in your scene, it's right there. It's going to shrink on me, though. Okay, so I got to grab it. I'm going to move it out here so it doesn't get jumbled up in there. Now, the first thing I do with these always is go to Options, Dome Light, and say Lock Texture to Icon. Okay, now what that does is, I've shown this before, but let's just go through it. With this light, there is the HDRI image, the high dynamic range image, attached as a map inside this dome light. This is just a V-Ray dome light with a map attached to it. If we take the map and drag it over to here and instance it, we'll see what that map looks like. Okay, it's super bright because it's like meant to be kind of physically accurate. So of course the sky is very, very bright. As I've shown in other courses, the lighting levels are all relative to each other, okay? So if my light bulbs in here are 20 and this one is 1, but it's super, super bright, maybe this one needs to go down. And we'll see how they relate to each other. Okay, I'm going to put it at 0.2 for now, and we'll see how it relates to each other. So when we render, we'll see if this is way too bright compared to my light bulbs inside, then I can just turn this down and get them closer in relationship to each other. And the camera exposure comes into play a lot with that too. We'll look at all these things. For now, let's leave it at 0.2 because I think that's a good relationship to what I have my bulb set to in here. Okay, but another important thing is, as you saw that image, see if it'll let me view the image. It does. Okay, so the sun is right there in the center. And what that means is, if you see this little tail coming off here, that's where the sun is in 3D. Okay, so the center of that image is right where this tail is. If you lock the texture to the icon, the center of this image will always remain right where this tail is. Okay, so what that means is if I rotate like this, now I know the sun is coming from this direction. Before you had this option, you couldn't lock it, and you'd have to say, okay, well, that's about negative 20 degrees from the 0 position over here, and you'd have to go into horizontal rotation and say negative 20 degrees. Okay, we're not going to do that. We're just going to keep this at 0 and then lock the icon so it rotates with the light. Okay, so where do we want our light coming from, our sun coming from? Let's say over here. And then that's all you have to do with that light. Just let it sit there. Then we'll put in a camera. And of course we use the create panel, camera, Vray, physical camera. Again, I want to turn off that roof because it's heavy on geometry. And we'll say, let's see, what do we want to look at? Why don't we look at this chair? Nope. Vray physical camera, look at the chair. Right there. Okay, make sure it's the right distance off the ground. I'm sure it's not. We want to be up here. And then let's look through that camera. For me, that's a hotkey of C. And we'll go over here to the pan camera. And we'll just look up at the chair. And I actually want to use this one, which is truck camera, and go down a little bit. I want to be looking at eye level. I don't want to be looking down at the chair. I want the camera to be at the same level as the chair, basically. Okay, great. One thing we need to do is set up safe frames because the proportions that we're seeing do not match what the camera is going to spit out, right? Okay, so we're set up to HD TV, so 1280 by 720. That's like half HD, but the proportions are good. We can use those proportions. So we just do Shift F is my hotkey for safe frames. Now this yellow is representing the proportions of our camera. I think maybe we make it a square proportion, right? Okay, we need this as custom. So we'll say 1500 by 1500. And you can see my safe frames changing. Okay, now that really changes the composition a lot. We need to now come in much closer, or not move the camera in closer. This moves the camera in closer. Dolly the camera. Boop, 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 boop. But what we actually want to do is select the camera that we're looking through and go to modify. And we want to change the focal length. Okay, so you'll see it should be evident to your eye what the difference is. Okay, so we just zoomed in with the camera. If you zoom out with the camera, it changes. Well, it's hard to notice when you're this zoomed in, but if you zoom out with the camera again, you see that the angles start skewing, right? And that's what zooming in and out does with the lens. When you're zoomed into 70, then your angles don't skew very much. Everything looks kind of like foreshortened or flat, right? So dollying the camera, it keeps everything kind of looking the same way. But zooming out with the lens will actually start skewing things. Okay, so you can see this kind of looks way out of scale compared to that chair. Things are skewy. So that's something to keep in mind. You get different results by moving the camera and by zooming the camera. It's not exactly the same thing. And basically what is different is your perspective lines. Okay, so your perspective lines will be less dramatic as your focal length goes up and much more dramatic as your focal length goes down. Okay, so I didn't want it to be all crazy, so I actually moved the camera fairly in close and also zoomed it in to 70. Which makes all my lines look pretty straight. So you can see, for example, this vertical line is straight up and down. And these, they converge over here instead of somewhere way out in space, right? Okay, so the idea is this would look a little closer to the natural eye. So here's a shot. Let's take a quick rendering of it and see what we get. Okay, it's not looking too good yet, right? Our light levels are not where they need to be, so our exposure isn't where it needs to be. We can go into here, into the Vray frame buffer, and add exposure. And say, let's go up. Okay, now the exposure looks about where it needs to be. Not a great looking shot because everything outside is super bright. and everything in here is really dark, so we're not focusing on the chair like we wanted to. This thing is distracting, right? Because, well, we focus on it just as much as we're focusing on the chair. The material's not looking great. There's a lot we could do with this image to make it a lot better, right? So we're going to start looking at that. We've got our camera in, but this is not yet a good rendering. So we will explore what we can do. I've got some ideas, and we will learn together how to enhance these kind of shots in the next video.